Hello, YouTube. I want to take some time to quickly talk to you about the Caitlin Clark injury and who's to blame for her taking so many shots and being injured so often this season. So ultimately, whenever I think about women's professional basketball, I think of the early years. I think of the early 2000s, where a lot of the women would go from college and being super hyped, being super popular and famous, to taking a step down to go to the pros in the WNBA and feeling like they only played 5 to 6 months out of the year, and they're only getting paid around $30,000 for their first contract. And the feeling was they'd only play for the summer and into the fall, and then they would take the rest of the year off and spend time with their families. They would go do other things, have other jobs, and they would treat their professional career as if it was just an extra career, something extra to bring in money, some other source of income for them, but then they'd have other parts of their life they'd want to get back to. And then in the late to early 2000s, Candace Parker came into the WNBA, and she was super hyped up. She did so many great things. She won the MVP instantly. She was the league's MVP instantly, and she ultimately did so many great things her first year. She took a year off to start a family, and then she came back, and it was like instantly she was getting hurt all the time. Players were taking shots on her. She was getting hurt so often that when you would try to tune into a game to watch Candace Parker, you weren't sure if she was going to be playing or not. So that kind of created the narrative that the WNBA was a bully league. That a lot of the players were there to try to hurt other players and bully them and not really to play the game. And there's kind of this feeling that on any given team, there's probably 1 to 2 players that could actually score, and the rest were just there to play defense, to be tough, to try to bully the other team and win the game by low scores and try to just force the other team into turnovers. And that was the feeling. And in those early years, there was Diana Taurasi, who was amazing. I feel like at the very beginning of her career, she could do almost anything offensively. There's a lot of good things she could do. And she had to learn to take her time, how to find her rhythm and not take so many shots. That's one reason why she had such a long career. But also, if anybody hurt any of her teammates or took any shots on her, she had to go and do the same thing back to them. Show them that if you hit me, I'll hit you as well. And that was kind of the culture that she created, as well as many other WNBA players at the time, like a Sue Bird. And it just kind of created this atmosphere of, okay, we're going to be tough, but we're going to try to foul you as much as we can and try to get you to turn the ball over, and that's going to be how we win. We're going to win by it being a brawl and seeing who wins at the very end. And in the mid to late 2010s, it kind of felt like a lot of players were getting injured, and there wasn't as many calls made towards players that were kind of being too aggressive, because there was worries about players being fined and how much money they'd be fined. And there's kind of became this culture of so many things got swept under the rug. You could foul somebody, and instantly the other team was going to foul you back, and there's just going to be this back and forth. And it kind of reminds me of the men's NBA from back in the early years, where a lot of players weren't as good as the key players on their team or on the other teams. And so they would try to foul to force turnovers. That's the only reason why they were playing. They weren't very skilled. And it wasn't until the time when Michael Jordan came to the NBA that people could see like he was the best player on any given night, and he was the player that was going to be fouled the most. People were going to take shots on him because he was the most famous. But at the time, he brought the most views to the NBA. And eventually there was guys like Shaquille O'Neal, who started his career off being very fast, very agile, but he had to be prepared to get fouled a whole lot. The hack-a-shack fouls, they call it. And he had to go to the free throw line a lot in games. And he had to kind of learn he had to stay in the paint, and he had to be unstoppable. He had to score on every single possession because he knew he was going to be fouled. And that was kind of the NBA in the early 90s and into the late 90s, where a lot of players were getting fouled just because they were the best player on the opposing team, and they had no other options. They were just going to foul you early, and that was going to be what was going to happen. And it led to a lot of fines, just kind of like what's happening today in today's NBA, where there is a lot of fines called. There is a lot of fouls that are taken, and people are being fined for that. And that was kind of the culture, was as more and more people are watching the NBA, people were getting fined for fouling other players. They were getting fined for their actions on the court. And then around the 2010s, there wasn't so much physicality in the NBA. They started really scaling it back, and the numbers and the audience numbers really grew. The media rights deals got bigger because they weren't expecting to see players getting fouled all the time. There was more opportunities for players to score. They weren't getting hit every single time they touched the ball. And I kind of feel like that's going to be the same thing in the WNBA, where there's this change of culture now with a Caitlin Clark, with an A'ja Wilson, where these players can score. And the narrative definitely is, especially with Caitlin Clark, is that she's a shooting guard now. She's not a point guard. Everybody has her playing off the ball. Mainly that's because they don't want her to get hit every single time. Whenever she's given the ball, there's whenever she's given the ball, there's a full court press on her. And she's constantly getting hit every single time, every single possession. They're trying to hit her. So by having her off the ball, there can't be that, oh, I was going for the ball, that's why I fouled you. So there's a lot more opportunities to show, like, hey, look, she's doing this. This is when they're hitting her. And hopefully it's going to draw a lot less contact on Caitlin Clark and hopefully help her stay healthier. So I ultimately feel like Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson are kind of like the modern day Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen dynamic, where we get to see these players who are constantly getting hit. Now for A'ja Wilson, when she gets hit, she'll hit them right back. She knows that she's the toughest dog in the yard, and she does amazingly well when she plays in Las Vegas. So she's not as worried as Caitlin Clark, because she'll just deal right back and hit the other player just as hard. But I feel like with Caitlin, it's kind of like that Michael Jordan moment, where everybody's trying to be physical with her, stop her from being able to play well, because they know they can't physically match her talent. Another old saying was, as soon as these women would go into the WNBA, they'd have to gain 10 pounds just because they have to be bigger and stronger. And the narrative's always been, whenever these players come to the WNBA, it takes them 1 to 2 years to kind of get used to the physicality, to get used to how to play and protect your body, and how to be able to have a long season, kind of like a Diana Taurasi. Choose your spots, choose your points. You don't have to always be the fastest player on the court. You can slow things down, try to find your gaps where you can score, and not risk your body so much. That's one thing Diana Taurasi did very, very well in her career, was preserve her body and know when to be physical, when to be fast, when to try to go for a basket, and when to really slow things down and protect yourself. I kind of feel like that's Caitlin Clark's reality right now, is when she does come back from injury, is how does she slow herself down? How does she find these gaps, these opportunities to score, and not risk her body so much? It might lead to her not having so many highlights, as we're accustomed to seeing, but it'll give her a chance to rely on her teammates a lot more, and not so much having these highlight reels where it's just her making all the 3-point shots and doing all these different things, to maybe she's making less of those, but she's being more consistent. She's relying on her teammates more. That'll ultimately help her to have a longer career than like a Candace Parker who's being hit the entire time she was playing, and the injuries would really rack up. I also feel that as more and more media rights deals get signed by the WNBA, there's going to be more of a need to penalize players, to foul players. And these players aren't going to be able to do these things. They're going to be fearful of what they do on the court if they make a mistake. Because right now, when they're only getting paid $66,000 a year to $200,000 a year, any fine could really just disrupt their finances. So the WNBA ultimately does not want to fine them. It wants them to still be on the court. It wants them to play hard, but they don't want to have to fine them. And also, they don't want to have to suspend anybody. They also don't want to have to suspend anybody because if they do, there's only so many players on a roster. So many players are hurt on every single team. There's only 12 players allowed on each team, and if there is a player's already hurt or if there's a player suspended, it can really be disruptive for any team. So I feel like that's one reason why there's so many foul calls. In the time that I've watched WNBA, they're usually very hesitant to call fouls. They're very hesitant to fine players just because of that narrative. So I ultimately feel like it will be like the modern NBA at some point, where there'll be so many media rights deals, so many people will be watching. They don't want to see the ugly fouls, the tackling players, choke slamming people. They're going to want to see good basketball being played. A lot of the players who come out of the college game are going to think, okay, I can go here now. I can be safe. I can have my little small WNBA career where I'm only playing 5 months out of the year and not going overseas. But I get to enjoy the winter months with my family. I get to work on being healthy. And hopefully that'll also be more of a financial compensation as well. Hopefully there'll be a lot more of a financial compensation as well, to where all these players can feel like they don't have to go overseas or play an unrivaled. They can focus on just playing in the WNBA. So that's my take on it, is the physicality has been here for a very long time. So you really can't blame the other players, because that's just the way how the game has grown over the years. So many players are used to having to foul other players and kind of play dirty. The coaches know it. They know what to expect. They know how they have to try to run an offense to where they're protecting all of their players. Then you might have the fastest player on the court, but also they'll be the most hit player on the court, so you need to try to protect them as well. The commissioner and all the front office people all know that's the kind of game that they're playing right now. They know how the culture is. But it's going to take time for that culture to ultimately change as we're seeing more and more athletes like Asia Wilson, Caitlin Clark come into the league, who do have amazing offensive skills. There's so many other players that are also really good on the offensive side, but there's also a whole lot of players that are not very good, who are very bad, who are only on a roster to play defense, to be disruptive. And that's not the kind of culture that will help the WNBA grow over the coming years and decades. But I do feel like it's going in the right direction. So ultimately, I feel like there needs to be a lot of changes made, but it's not going to happen overnight. But eventually, the WNBA as a whole will decide not to bring certain players back. Players who have a history of being disruptive or are fouling people out of nowhere and just doing all these things, they're not going to be brought back as often. There's going to be all these younger players coming into the league that aren't going to be fearful of coming in because they don't want to be bullied. I feel like that narrative will eventually go away, and there will be a stronger WNBA moving forward. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. I'll catch you on the next one.